Kaya everyone, Wanju. I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of where we are today, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. To pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, I also want to acknowledge the season we're in, which is Makaru, the season of fertility. Sovereignty has never been ceded and people have been here since the world was soft. So I want to say thank you, Buja. Now repeat after me, thank you, Buja.
Thank you, Buja.
Okay. Now, I'm in conversation today with Michael Woodley and Paul Cleary. Together, they have been touring the country talking about First Nation futures and their relatively new book, which you can purchase today just through here from Boffins. It is a great gift for your mum, your fly-in, fly-out mates, your next-door neighbour and anyone who can read. Today, I want to start by asking Michael a big question, a question about from when the world was soft. Michael, tell us about Yindjibarndi country.
Boy, okay. Firstly, guys, thanks for the invite. Thanks to the library for holding this event and inviting Paul and I to come and have a chat about the book. To all the sponsors who contributed to it. Some of the staff members as well who helped Paul and I to get here. And I just want to pay my respect as well to the Noongar Boodja First Nation people of this area, who have always sort of allowed us to come here and walk freely into their country and be guided by their ancestors and their spirits. So I want to thank the elders, past and present, and those emerging. One day, everybody. I come to speak to you all. Don't be afraid. Everybody's belief system is first and foremost centered around the term "ngora nyujungamo" when the world was soft. Is a belief system that starts with in the beginning of creation, the first light, the first song. Everything about Yindjibarndi is centered around Angora and how Angora was created, and the ancestors and the spirits that walked the country before they created Ngarangale, Aboriginal people. And when Mengala, our god, started to form the Angora, it then had a very challenging process of then creating the Ngarangale. In the Pilbara alone, there's many Ngarangale, about close to 35, I think, different language groups. So we sit in the Pilbara region. If anyone have a geographical sort of understanding of the Pilbara, around the Military National Park, the Hamersley Ranges. So it's more of the iron ore business, iron ore sort of industry country. And when he created Yindjibarndi, he said, this is our language, Yindjibarndi, this is our songs, this is our culture, this is our customs, and these are the rules of how you must conduct those everyday activities. There's one rule that you can't do is go into your neighbor's country without their permission. So Manjong is a form of a stranger that has to bear all responsibility for his, at that time, where the men led all of the Yindjibarndi culture, that they had to first and foremost ask permission before entering into other people's country. So we still see that as one of the key factors of our country today, that Manjang will come into our country without our permission and doing what they're doing now. So the book is kind of centered around that, people coming into the country without permission and taking what belongs to Yindjibarndi. I can go on, Robert, but like I said, you've got to stop me, right?
Paul's sitting there very keen to get a word.
Yeah, totally.
Paul is someone who has had permission to come onto the Yindjibarndi country, which has led to this book. So Paul's interests include resources and economic policy, with a number of other books, such as Too Much Luck, Minefield, $1 Trillion Baby. And people in the audience should also take a look at these pieces. What took you to the Pilbara to begin with?
Yeah, look, thanks very much, Robert. Firstly, I obviously want to acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people and their elders, past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge that sovereignty hasn't been ceded. And I also want to thank the State Library for hosting this event, because I thought it was interesting on the website. They say this festival is about conversations that many would prefer not to have. And it is interesting that in some sections of the community, there's been a sort of a deafening silence around this book because it is something that people don't really want to talk about. So thanks so much to the State Library. And I spent a lot of time working here actually on one of my first books, a history of the Second Independent Company, which was mainly raised in WA during World War II. And so I'm very familiar with this place and also with spending time here in Western Australia. So with the Pilbara, as you mentioned, I've got an interest that goes back to my time working in East Timor shortly after independence. And I had the privilege to work for a new government that was up against the Australian government that was denying its rights to the resources of the Timor Sea. And I suppose that sort of forged a really strong interest in resource policy and who benefits and how to address those sort of power imbalances that often mean that the real beneficiaries actually get ripped off in a sense. And so my very first book was a book called Shakedown, which was about the battle between Australia and East Timor over those resources. And East Timor, actually, what's interesting about that case is it had very strong leaders. You might know Xanana Gusmao, Jose Ramos Horta, former presidents of the country who took a really strong stand. So about 5 years after writing that book, I was working at the Australian newspaper. I think Robert's going to give me a hard time for that later on. But anyway, and one of the good things I have to say about the Australian is it takes Indigenous policy pretty seriously and invests a lot of resources in it. And so I'd heard about this merging stoush, for want of a better word, in the Pilbara. And so I picked up the phone and I rang the CEO, as you do, and had a bit of a talk to him. And it's not often as a journalist that you talk to someone for the first time and they make a big impression on you. But Michael certainly did. I just thought he was so articulate, so forthright and principled. He was talking about United Nations human rights, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and all these really important international standards that Australia really wasn't adhering to and wasn't being respected in this particular case. So as a result of that, I really thought this is a story I want to follow. And then about a year later, I was also doing doctoral studies at the ANU on resources, and I went to the Pilbara and I met with Michael and other people, and I had the privilege of interviewing this man, Manyanbangu Ned Cheedy, one of the oldest and most revered Yindjibarndi elder, someone whose knowledge went back to before the time of first contact because he'd lived with his grandparents. He at the time was 106 years old. And I won't go into a lot of detail because it's in the book and I don't want to spoil it, but it was just one of those sort of unforgettable interviews that was just electrifying, the way he spoke to me and also the way he spoke about Michael. And so it was sort of coming out of that interview, I thought, well, this is a story I really want to follow, and I then spent the next 10 years doing that.
I think it was 10 years well spent. And I think in that way, one way to think about your work is about resource and extraction, but the other way to think about your work is about the heroes in these stories, which is to say the freedom fighters. We have freedom fighters in Xanana Gusmao, and people that we recognise on the world stage, and in a kind of national way, Michael fits into that as well. So I want to ask Michael a question about his people, about who is involved in this story, the characters that they are. Can you tell us about the people in your community and why they matter here and now?
Well, they're very important, I think. If you take the journey of the fighters now, some 12 years since we've told a certain mining company that we are not interested in having a deal with you. So the real, I think, heroes of this story is the people themselves. My philosophy has been, in terms of leading Yindjibarndi down a path where we hold on to our principles, but we also hold on to the very important thing that makes us who we are, which is our land. Really come back to the people. You either put the Yindjibarndi interest first or you don't, right? As a Yindjibarndi person. So the community quickly understood that because they had responsibilities. Our culture, as I've tried to explain earlier, comes directly from, Singa Mingala. So God tells us that this is who you are, and He's your responsibility and obligations, and so on and so forth. And if you don't fulfill them, then you won't go to Yindjibarndi heaven. And we strongly believe that. So our ancestors and people who came before us and things like that, when we pass away, we don't care where we go, as long as we, are reunited with our family again. So that was I think the most important thing for me, is that if I can bring my people on this journey with me, and they would, and first and foremost, understand and accept, I think, that the Yindjibarndi interest is something that they have to also take on, as well as the responsibility. And if they had that, then we had no problem them standing up for, against anything or anyone, because that's the only thing that matters. And we go back to the human rights, rights and declarations, and the principles of the rights and declaration as well. There's a thing called free and prior informed consent, that all Yindjibarndi people must feel comfortable that their land is being taken by someone, and it's being done for the purpose that they all informed, that it doesn't affect who they are, and the obligation and responsibility didn't pass that on to the next generation. So the people, I think, in this story are the real heroes.
That's right. And in that way, in that kind of, to put it into the context of where we're speaking about, this is also the place where there's a lot of land rights activism going back a long time in the short history of the nation that we call Australia. You can think about the 1946 Pilbara strike as a foundation stone there. You can think about the strong actions taken by lots of language groups around the Pilbara for pastoral workers advocating against stolen wages as opposed to stolen land, Yura. So I think this kind of sets a scene in a different way, that kind of thinking about the community too. I want to flip back to Paul now and ask in that sense, who are some of the characters you encountered that might be of interest that people can read a bit more about in the book, but that also for you were compelling? So you spoke about Chidi here, and I want to understand the people, a bit of the community here.
Yeah, so no, that was the real privilege in doing this. And I mean, one of the things that's gone on here, which is really sad, is that the community has been divided, not quite down the middle, but sort of 70-30, with 30% at least siding with FMG. But I interviewed a lot of those people as well. But the really amazing thing I think about this story that comes out of it, I think, is the connection to country. And there's some really beautiful evidence that was given in the native title cases. There's one that I actually quote like a whole page from a woman by the name of Tutsi Daniel, and she talks about camping out on country and the dreaming and getting a jowie, which is a spirit in your dream, and waking up with that spirit in the morning. So it's there's some really quite powerful stuff, and the really interesting thing is that it really was convincing to the legal minds who looked over this case. So first starting with Justice Stephen Rares, who I don't know if he's I'm not sure if he's a spiritual person, but he certainly really respected deeply the spirituality of the Yindjibarndi people, and that to see that coming out in a legal judgment is really quite extraordinary, I thought. And it went to the full bench of the federal court as well, and again that same respect and understanding of Aboriginal culture. And I think one thing that emerges from this as a nation, as we think about what reconciliation's all about, and if we have people at this level really thinking about this and respecting Aboriginal belief and tradition, then that's a pretty important step forward. And even though there's some really sad and depressing things about this story and the corporate conduct that's gone on, I think in terms of the legal fight and what's come out of that, it's actually, I think, a massive leap forward in a sense for Australia.
It's interesting. Sorry if I could add as well. I mean, that photo, that's again, I mean, the Yindjibarndi struggle and the fight that we had really rested on the shoulder of Ned. He was our leader. He was the elder statesman at that time, and he continued to sort of, play his role, which is, keeping Yindjibarndi, united rather than having someone come in and put a wedge in our community that obviously then disrupts our culture and stories and songs and so on and so forth. So one day I went to see him, and the photo that he has there, now that's my youngest son, who's now 15. And it's kind of interesting as well in terms of this story I want to tell you. I went to see him, and English is his second language. So he's born on country, and he speaks Yindjibarndi first, and then he speaks good English as well. But I went to see him, and I asked him, because we were having this fight or this division, whose country is it? You know, there's a mining company mining on that country. Whose country is it? There was Yindjibarndi people who were kind of putting forward that they were the one that had the entitlement and you know all of that stuff. So I went to see him one day, and I said, you know, one day, you know, na ngora ngandere bani binyarango, ngana ngona nyambale. He said, well, you know, good morning, my grandfather. This country that we all sort of having a dispute about. Who's the boss? And I was hoping that he would say, well, ngamba nyambale, I'm the boss because I'm the elder. But his response to me had me pausing for a bit. And he said, well, and with that response, I paused and I thought, well, and he was in his, I think, late 90s, probably early 100s. And so I thought then, well, the old man has lost it now, you know. But just with that response, I'll tell you what it is as well, right? And his response was, go and ask the kids, go and ask the children. So I thought that was a bit of a weird sort of response in terms of Ngana Nyambalif, who's the boss for the land, who's the boss for the country, and he said, I'll go ask the kids. So as I've learned over the years talking to my elders, that there is some meaning in those comments. And what I've learned over the years as well is if there's a comment that doesn't sit well with the answer you're looking for, then you have to engage in a conversation. So I engaged in the conversation. So my response was to him then afterward, well, ngani ngai bangari mangola rayakai. So what do I go and ask the kids? Then we got into a conversation. Well, you mangola yaga mangola yala, you never jaringo. Na mangola pola ngona wajigarre. Una bani mangola, una bani walewe. Nadare ngona beromo. Una den bani yala ngara, una marajare. Una bani goramba ngara. Una bani jojo ngara, una bani goramba jojo. Una go yana manyo ngana unwara nyapaleo. So his response to me too was that you don't ask him now, right? Because it's just a kid. You have to wait till he grows up. So it's a baby, he becomes a young man, he becomes a young man that we put through our initiation and ceremony. He becomes a young man that then can marry. Then when he marries, he becomes a man. Then after that, he becomes a senior man. After he becomes a senior man, he becomes an elder. When he becomes an elder, he becomes an old man, like me. Then you ask him, who's the boss for the land? And he said, so if he's been taught anything by the elders as he's growing up and then become an old man, he would then direct you back to go and ask the baby. So I learned then that this is a very sacred culture that I'm involved in, and a very sacred land that I've also been inherited to look after for the next generation. And I think we can all learn from that. We're kind of going through what is one of our greatest challenges as a whole society, which is climate change. And I think if we have that mentality that you don't make any decision until you ask the baby, because they have to also inherit this land and enjoy the things that we've enjoyed and our grandfathers enjoyed and their grandfathers also before them, then, there might be hope for us all, I think, moving forward. So with that in mind, that then sort of, then directed me that the strength of the people was very important. And I had to stay close to the community and my people. Mm.
In that way, in thinking about the strength of the people, we are, in one way, talking about self-determination, just like we are talking about sovereignty. And also in the concept of the book, we're talking about reconciliation in action. You guys are a duo, you are a team. So in that sense, Michael's name is not on the book and Paul's name is on the book, but both of them will be available to sign the book afterwards because you work together and you have collaborated together for a long time.
His photo's on the cover.
His photo's on the cover. And your photo is on the inside.
And he's paying me $50 a pop as well, right? So.
Exactly, you know? And I think in that way, this is a kind of example both of sovereignty and self-determination in terms of Michael being a leader for Yindjibarndi people and being that boy growing into a young man, into a senior man, into an elder, and into a boy again. And in that way, it's also a type of reconciliation and action between the story you two tell. So I want to ask about the process of this. How have you come to an understanding, and how have you grown to appreciate the Pilbara? If we know what took you there initially, where does it stand now for you, Paul? Where does Yindjibarndi country stand for you now?
Well, I mean, at the moment, it's pretty sad that there's no self-determination at all, and there's no respect for Indigenous rights. This has gone all the way to the High Court of Australia, and they've affirmed the exclusive native title possession of the Yindjibarndi people. And on the very same day of FMG's appeal being dismissed, the company put out a statement saying, "We've always respected the non-exclusive possession," which is a weaker form of native title that sort of gives, in a way, kind of visiting rights. So, I mean, I think what we have here is some pretty fundamental disrespect for Indigenous rights and for the traditional owners of that country. So I think it's a pretty sad situation in a sense that is actually what is happening. I mean, Yindjibarndi country has been mined since May 2013 to at least $30 billion of revenue has been extracted. It's contributed more than 20% of Fortescue Metals' income, and yet there is no agreement with the traditional owners. There has been no compensation paid. So what we've got here is a major Australian company, and I guess many of us in the room have actually benefited from that through our superannuation funds. Some of us may even be shareholders, dare I say. But and here's a company that's really not respecting those rights at all, and really acting as if native title doesn't exist, and that Aboriginal people really don't have any rights at all. So, I mean, we're sort of going back, in a sense, to the bad old days of just dispossession and assimilation, in a sense. I mean, the idea is that we'll give you a job, you're driving a mining truck or whatever, but we're not really interested in supporting you in what you want to do as traditional owners and Aboriginal people. And not only have the Yindjibarndi people been completely ripped off to the tune of more than $30 billion, I mean, they've actually had to cop some pretty dreadful kind of abuse, really. I mean, we had the chairman of the company saying that you walk around Roebourne at night and you can get sexual favours from young girls and the like, really derogatory, demeaning stuff about these people, telling the AGM in 2019, that's not a community I'm going to empower with tens of millions of dollars of your cash. In other words, these people are worthless and deserve nothing, in a sense. So it's not a great situation, and it's a shame that there hasn't been reconciliation, and Michael has certainly been willing to do that on a number of occasions. He's extended the olive branch and said that he's willing to do that. But hopefully, I mean, there are companies that are operating in a better way, and hopefully with these sorts of discussions, and also I think with a new government in Canberra that is perhaps more concerned about respecting Indigenous rights, particularly in relation to the heritage destruction, that is something that I think that would be good to consider. I'll just show you one more slide, which may not show up that well, but this is what FMG has done in the way it's mined is that when consultants came up and identified possible burial grounds in rock shelters like Juukan Gorge, they got fired. And the state government became concerned about what they were hearing and reading. And so they did an investigation, and this is just 4 square kilometres, and you can see the sort of the purple coloured dots with circles around them. They're the areas that were identified. but there's about a dozen more red dots, and they're the areas, and this is around a creek that's actually very rich in Aboriginal heritage, where the government came along and looked at this and said, well, you didn't declare all these sites, and that's because you hired a bunch of consultants who actually were just wanting to get the project approved rather than caring about the country. So this is kind of what's been going on, and that's just a small little microcosm of what's been happening. But and this is all just still continuing. But hopefully there is a big push to strengthen heritage protection. And I think particularly the new government in Canberra is looking to maybe take more of a role in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if that is one aspect of the story, I want to ask you, Michael, now on the other aspect of the story. Can you speak a bit more about the kind of good behaviour, the kind of good things you're seeing in the community right now? Because there's amazing stuff when you go to Roebourne. There's Jullawalu. I've got the memory games that my daughter loves playing with. I've got the amazing cloth. There's so much activity. There's so much possibility that the community is driving this forward and articulating their sovereignty. And the place is strong. The place is resilient. The place is also a story of remarkable energy and strength as a whole. So can you give us the flip side of that?
Well, no, of course. I mean, I think we as a community, we have to, provide our members with other alternatives or other means to live their lives. I mean, everything can't be sort of hinged upon a mining company coming to your country and mining and then promising all of these all of these things in terms of dollars and opportunities and all that sort of stuff, right? I mean, we first and foremost have to acknowledge the fact that we come from and if you guys, some of them read the book as well, you can obviously relate to my personal journey as well. I was taken out of school when I was year 6. And taken out of the country with my grandfather. And that's where I've been, ever since, till I came back into town up and down town, but I never went back to school again. Everything about me is self-taught. So I had to work really, really hard in terms of getting the position to where I am now and to understand how this whole system works. And I took it on for a long, long time that, people operate in face value. At least that's how I've been taught by my grandfathers. What you said is what you really meant and you followed through with it. Boy, was I surprised, right? That meet a lot of people and really they just lied to you, and that's not someone doing it intentionally. It was just the way of the world, it's the way that how people operate at that time. So I was really disappointed with that, and then thought, well, I have to quickly learn how society operates, because I'm just a boy from Roebourne, and first and foremost I'm a Yindjibarndi. So I've learned how to take people face value and respect what they say. And in our culture, if you didn't do that, then you walk around with a spear in your leg. But living in Yindjibarndi, life is quite simple. You know where you stand and what things you can and can't do. And living contemporary life is more of those challenges. So the other strategy, I suppose, in terms of standing up for our principles was that, well, how do we bring people on the journey and then install self-determination? So out of that became our, after having a community meeting, came our 3C principle, which is based on community, culture, and commercial development. We live in a high sort of area of industry development, so we believe that we not only deserve the opportunity, we should demand the opportunities of being self-determining through other means of creating our own commercial resources. But the other two parts of the 3Cs, community and culture, well, community is more of as we get to understand how the system works, it's a government responsibility, and government has the whole Western Australia state to look after. We don't have much funds in our coffers, and you have to you have to develop the structure and the credibility that people in government are willing to support what we're trying to do in that community space. But in our cultural space, of Yindjibarndi culture, language, stories, songs, and so on and so forth, no one really cared about, So that's a Yindjibarndi and Yindjibarndi alone, requirement. We have to somehow, work on that ourselves. So Lorraine and I, when we started Jullawalu some 24 years ago, we did it on the smell of oily rag and working on what a program they had back in the late 90s, early 2000s, called the CDP, Work for the Dollar. So, that was paying us $220 a week. raising a family, looking after, working with old people, anywhere from 10 to 12 hours a day. And so we told ourselves straight away that it's the passion, not the paycheck, right? And we have to just keep going forward. And then once we've started to establish the importance of that, then it was easier then to sort of say, well, we accept this life, no matter how hard it is. And from that 3C principle, we also told that our people that you don't have to worry about not having choices in life. If your education situation and other skills and qualifications are something that will always restrict you from getting the opportunities, then we can create those other opportunities through these other two portfolios, and then slowly bring our people on the journey with us, and then change some of the aspirations of things that they want to do. And if we didn't do that, then we'd only rely on our commercial opportunities within the area, and it's 100% driven by that. And you have to have all of the bells and whistles and the tickets and the education to even qualify to have a job. But then the brain drain starts. They take the best and the brightest out of our community, and you leave the community struggling and defending for themselves. So again, that was another sort of a process strategy moving forward, was to bring the people on the journey and say, well, you do matter. And we're going to create these opportunities in these other areas, and it's the rising tide lift all shift mentality, right? And we wanted to give them that, give them that reassurance that no one's leaving you behind, and we can find opportunities through these other means in our communities through culture and through culture and community developments.
Could I just add a couple of points on that? I think it's a really interesting story about culture, I think, with the Yindjibarndi people and how they've gone about things. Michael's partner, Lorraine, is here with us today, and she's been one of the driving forces behind this group called Julawalu, which is all about cultural preservation, and they've produced a huge number of films and books, and they do artwork and the like, and it's a group of some of the people involved. And while the Yindjibarndi have had this monumental legal battle to wage, which has drained their resources and their time and everything else, they've still been getting on with it, which has been incredible. And one of the amazing things they've done is they purchased this old hotel called the Old Victoria Hotel, which was a dreadful place and a scene of great, sort of social mayhem, and it's the place where John Peter Patt was bashed outside of and then later passed away. So the slide's just not coming up, but that's because I'm pressing the wrong button. Got it now. This is the Gunnalili Centre, and that's the Old Victoria Hotel on the right. As you can see, an absolute diabolical place. And they've now reimagined this and turned it onto the ground floor and done a beautiful renovation job. They bought the whole site. Next door to it, they're building a training centre for young people coming out of the justice system to get some qualifications and so they can get a job. But this centre is just fantastic. And one of the things I love about it most is when Michael first told me, he said, we're going to have a cultural centre on the ground floor and offices on the first floor. And my immediate thought was, you'll have your office up there, of course, which is, fair enough. But no, he's still up the hill in some tin shed. And they're renting out the office space on the first floor to bring in
It's
income.
the old kindergarten.
Yeah.
I have my kindergarten teacher here in the front row as well. Yeah.
Sorry. But it's tin though, it's metal anyway. It's not flash, let me say that. Yeah. But it is air conditioned now, I must say. Yep. Anyway, but they've built this beautiful centre, and it's just such a great testament to not just their ability, but also their thinking, the Yindjibarndi thinking as well, to say, no, we're not going to just have the flash office, we'll actually bring money in and help to continue to develop the community.
Yeah. So this is trying to answer your question as well, but that's just one of the projects, and there's other things as well happening, in the community with, sorry?
No, you're absolutely right, because like Paul says, it's a distraction, right? In one way, the court case as detailed in the book matters, but in another way, like you say, it's a distraction from all of the other community building work that you do, which has been going on in your life for a lot longer, going far back to CDP, but also a time from when you were born is to build up this community, right? Is to build up and participate in this community. And in that way, I think what is remarkable is like Gunalili and Julawalu and the kind of ability to stay centred and strong in your culture because of your community. So there's the culture, there's the community, and there's commercial development. What do both of you see as that kind of importance of that for other people? It's part of a healing journey, but it's also an example. And this goes partly to your leadership over the last 20 years, but your leadership in the next 20 years. So how do you see this as a kind of example for people?
Well, I think if anything, right, it shows that we can achieve anything if we put our mind to it and we continue to work hard and we have faith and belief that there are other good people out there who are willing to partner up with us, and that's really been one of our keys as well, is building strong relationships and having other partnership with other people. We can advocate as far as we can, in terms of what we're doing. But when we bring other people into the Yindjibarndi structure and journey, I suppose, and they become advocates and flag flyers for us as well, because we need the message to also get out there. And many people in this room that has close connections with, senior politicians and senior leaders in other areas as well. So it all helps. And I think relationship for us and partnerships has been one of our keys moving forward. And we want to continue having that to be the lasting effect, I think, for the next generation to also hold on to and take forward as well for the next generation, and all of us, kind of work together, because if we all believe in the same thing, that self-determination and equality and rights belong to all people, then we shouldn't have a problem.
Yeah, and I just add to that. I just think it is a fantastic case study, and I actually urge all of you, if you're up that way, to go to Roebourne and just see what's happening on the ground there. It's just fantastic, and at a time when there's a view out there, and it's been put by, in this case, there's been this claim that compensation is mining welfare, and it just causes devastation and the like, and it's I think there is a very strong case to show that Aboriginal people are getting on with it, and this is a fantastic example of that, and I think it's a really uplifting one for communities all around Australia to know about this, but also I think for governments to know that self-determination does work. In other countries and with similar colonial backgrounds to us, the United States, New Zealand, self-determination is sort of the default policy position. But unfortunately in this country we've sort of moved around and we've had this kind of like tops-down approach, assimilationism as well. So yeah, it's a very important case study, I think, and a great role model for the whole nation.
Yeah, I'll ask you one more question on that, Paul, before we come back to Michael. Is, in that way, what do you think the future is for resources in particular? So we've kind of seen what's happening in a community development way, but you also gestured towards self-determination and resources. What do you think this is in regards to the impact and opportunities for First Peoples, thinking a little bit in your role with Oxfam too?
Yeah, well, no, it's a good question. And I mean, I think what we're seeing now, particularly with this whole shift to green energy, we've seen the green hydrogen push, but there's also all the rare earths, and there's now the narrative of we have to just accelerate the development, speed up the approval processes because of climate change, and we've got to develop all these batteries and electronic cars and the like, and I accept that is important, but at the same time, and the Minerals Council is onto this, and they're starting to push it really, really hard, I think, with the new government. So I think it is a real concern that what's going to happen, particularly in places like Western Australia with a lot of resources, is you are going to see more and more development, and potentially on an even much bigger scale. You've already seen your iron ore production increase fivefold, from around 200 million tonnes to nearly 1 billion tonnes in the space of 2 decades. And I think those sorts of impacts, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot more of them. So I think for that reason, it's important that Aboriginal people have a voice, and they don't just get sort of steamrolled over in this process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a challenging and complex question for the state and everyone living here, and as well as to think about how we do get off that easy mining money. Like, what does that mean in terms of creating wealth, which is something that Kate O'Muir has gestured towards, and which is a very live issue.
Yeah, although one thing I'd add is I think it's the idea of what happens with the money and and all that. I think the Yindjibarndi again are an example of this. They've had dealings with Rio Tinto. Maybe Michael can talk about them, but where there seems to be a real kind of a partnership approach. And I think that idea of corporate social responsibility does extend, not in a paternalistic way, but to sort of rolling up your sleeves and getting involved in what's happening on the ground as real partners, because I mean the money is coming from mining, and I think it's important that that the two kind of work together, and I think then you potentially get a better result.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about that, Michael? You mentioned before the partnerships you've had, the relationships you've built as being central to the kind of Yindjibarndi story, but can you tell us a couple of stories about the partnerships that have worked and stayed that way?
Well, a part of that 3C structure we have as well. I mean, what we've done in terms of our relationship with Rio Tinto is bring them along on the journey with us in terms of investing in the 3C model, rather than us investing in some idea or ideology that industry have in terms of self-determination and what it takes or means to be an individual working for working for a mining company. I think one of the most important thing is that we have to think outside of industry, and look at other industries that we can also establish and develop. Because one day, industry is going to pack up and go. The iron ore is going to run out, the oil and gas is going to run out, and we want to make sure that at the end of the day we contribute to a legacy that our next generation could also have a strong foundation on. That industry could be other things, doing agriculture and green energy, water management and so on and so forth, right? Tourism, cultural activities and all that sort of stuff. So they need to be the future in terms of moving forward, particularly where we live anyway, in the Pilbara. It's a rich culture. There's a rich history in terms of what's been happening there for the last, or what's been happening there, over the 200 years. We have to make sure that we don't get, that we don't get sucked into the, industry's ideology of what they believe that Aboriginal people should, should be doing, and the outcomes that we should be all following, right? So what we've done is, in terms of some examples, right, is again supporting what we believe is the core, the foundation of our culture, which is culture first, community second, and then what we can achieve in our commercial space would have to be established as a nation's business. So whatever we achieve in the commercial goes back into supporting both community and the cultural portfolios. In some cases as well, and some of the people in the room, obviously, kind of know this as well, that industry likes to take individuals from our community and then, give them this false narrative, a false, what do you call it, a vision that if you start a business, you can make hundreds of millions of dollars, doing it. And I'm pretty sure you will as well, but it takes time, and then you have to realize as well that heavy competitors in that market as well, right? So going into business as a nation, what you're doing is that you're bringing the whole nation to the boardroom of the likes of Rio Tinto or any other industry players as well, and saying, well, we're sitting down here talking to you as the nation, and this is important to us because everyone who's a member of Yindjibarndi is a member of this business. And we wanted to succeed for the reason that the funds need to flow back into assisting community and cultural development programs. And that becomes a bit more easy for us then to sort of navigate and have the narration with senior leaders in the industry. And out of that, we started a business called Yura some 8 years ago. It was a JV that we went into with two guys who owned the business in Port Ellen, at the time. There's about 4 employees that they had, and we said at that time that we want to be the best grass cutters in the Pilbara, right? We're going to go and cut your grass and do your ground maintenance, and then slowly then move to facility management of cleaning the rooms and boardrooms and so on and so forth, right? So we started off with having 4 employees in 2014, and we started the business. Now we employ over 150. and we got a good turnover coming in. And most, we have a 38% First Nations people employed, 45% female, and it's a business that we're proud of.
And are you the best grass cutters?
We're still doing that as well, right?
Yeah,
Because that's
that's
the
right.
pathway to employment, right?
Yeah.
But we established 4 other pathways, facility maintenance, civil maintenance, civil construction maintenance, and also building and maintenance, right? So that it's again the pathway to employment, that we can bring people in who doesn't have much of the education background, but knows exactly how to do the simple jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's an achievement that we're all proud of, and it's owned by the nation. That business is owned by the nation, or 66% owned by the nation, anyways. But that's, like I said, if the more we become successful, the more success then feeds back into the other 2 portfolios that we struggle to get supported on. But as we move along, government has been really good to us as well. So they funded the old Victoria Hotel. They funded stage 2 as well with a park in between, and they're now funding stage 3, which is a short-term transitional accommodation for our members. So we can house them anywhere from 12 to 18 months, and then transfer them into more permanent housing either in Roban, Wickham, or Karratha. But it's to assist them as well by sticking with a apprenticeship or traineeship and not being disturbed by family members living in the same house and other things like that.
Yeah.
So that's one achievement. Julolo, we continue to support that, so that's continued to record history with the elders and take on the art form now and bring other community members to that project, and that's going leaps and bounds as well. They're moving into text, other art projects with designing and selling more products and materials in what they're doing in that. And our relationship with industry, who want to do the right thing, have also put us in a position where I think that in the next 10 years it'll obviously be a different situation for the people of Roban.
Absolutely. The next 10 years are kind of great to envision. And in that way, you also said something that was really important, that if you bring other people with you along that journey, you set each other up for success. So at this point in time, it's a chance for you and the audience to participate in this journey. If anyone has a question, there's people roving around with microphones, so feel free to put your hand up and someone will come and find you. Yeah.
Since you have published the book, and this is a question to both Michael and Paul, have you had any communication whatsoever from or with Andrew Forrest personally or Fortescue as a corporate entity? And if the answer is yes, what was the nature of that communication?
Not since, no. There's been none since at all. But Fortescue did cooperate. They answered questions, not all of them. And I had to go back a few times to say, you haven't answered this question about your impact on burial grounds. It's a pretty important issue. I think you need to address it. And they gave me a bit of a strange answer, actually. Equivocal one. So no, but no, not since.
Yeah, next question.
You want me to answer? Yeah, sure. The answer is, well, yes and no, right? In the epilogue in the book, it talks about we were starting to get the negotiations back on the table. But since the book has come out, then they sort of abruptly cut off the negotiations, and then everything went quiet, But then several months after that, they tried to reach out again and have a conversation. But I said, well, look, I'm kind of busy at the moment. Don't call me, I'll call you, right?
We've got grass to cut.
Oh, got grass to cut, exactly.
Next question. Yeah, sorry, just here.
If you could be the driver of a new and true relationship with Fortescue, what would that look like? Who would you bring along the journey? How would you do it? And what response would you want from Fortescue? Not the chairman, but the company.
Well, I said something in an article about a month back, I think, when these articles were flying around. I said the whole responsibility really rests with FMG, not in Andrew Forrest. I think FMG has a responsibility to do the right thing. The company is obviously a public listed company, has multiple shareholders and investors and so on and so forth. So the company needs to take responsibility. That's the first thing, I think. And the second thing is that the door, in terms of having a conversation, has always been open. But we can't, and when I said I'll get back to them, it's for the reason that they want to just talk about, putting in measures that takes us further down the track, right? We have a 12-year history already, or we know what's happened. So the conversation needs to be, okay, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of why we have this, division. And if you're serious about that, then they would put forward a position to say, this is how we want to end this dispute, And it comes with, respecting everybody that we're running in the country, having a fair compensation package that also assists and helps Yindjibarndi people to continue with their big picture plans in the community, and so on and so forth, right? Until that happens, there's really nothing I can do. I mean, it's that story of the horse in the water, You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Next question.
Hi. This is a question for both. I feel like the questions are running along a similar theme. I guess I wanted to ask about how we as members of the public, as we're starting to understand more through your book, the behaviour of FMG, how can we as citizens help to hold them to account? And I guess I'm thinking in particular about social licence to operate, and it's this weird kind of intangible thing, but is it something that could possibly be revoked, and what might that look like?
Well, I was going to say that you could become a shareholder and go to the AGM, but that might not be your cup of tea. But you do have you're in a super fund, and the super funds are onto this, and they have been trying to engage with FMG. And so I think it's a pretty important issue perhaps to be raising with your super fund. But yeah, the AGM is actually a pretty important forum, and a lot of climate activists have had some pretty good success in trying to get resolutions up and get change at the highest level. And I know there's a group called the Australian Centre for Corporate Responsibility, which had a go at the last AGM. But the more that you could maybe take that up at the AGM and say, what the hell is going on here? You surely can do better. I think that it's good in a sense, to kind of get in the face of the senior executives.
And I have a different view to that. I think the regulator should be the state government. We have a Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. I think any type of pressure and lobbying should be directed to him. I'm still blown away with the fact that we have a Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Why? If you want to be the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, then do something about it. You can see what's been happening in the last 12 years. It's been publicly sort of advertised and viewed and written. Paul written a book about it, and people have been talking about it, and so on and so forth, right? So the government is responsible for this. They're the ones who are giving our land away.
I mean, that is a really good point. It's sort of classic sort of Pontius Pilate. They've just washed their hands of this. They don't want to know. Even though they have issued the mining leases, they bear the responsibility for what's going on.
Yep.
And the other thing I would add to that is also that you can support organisations like Juluwalu. You can support small community opportunities for Aboriginal people right across the nation and internationally. And that means attending events, and that means purchasing textiles, and it means participating in alternative economic opportunities that we all have a benefit from. So there's shareholder activism, there's state-based activism, but there is the building up of strength and autonomy, not only as allies, but as activists who participate as citizens in this place where Yindjibarndi people do have sovereignty. Next question. Yeah, you've got the mic.
Yes, question for Michael and Paul. A number of us in the audience are actively supporting Aboriginal custodians trying to stop destruction of Aboriginal heritage, such as went on in Solomon Hub. And I'm just wondering, Michael, could you say something about the cultural loss involved in FMG's project in Solomon Hub, And also, Paul, could you say something about where does that fit into the story of Juukan Gorge and down the road, Burrup Peninsula, where the state government is actively promoting the building of a fertiliser plant in the middle of the world's oldest and largest outdoor rock art gallery, and expansion of Woodside's Scarborough LNG project, which is degrading globally significant rock art.
I can go first.
Yeah.
Yep. We've identified now over 5,000 heritage sites that's been, destroyed, disturbed, or replaced, or removed. Sorry, in the footprint of FMG's mine working on our country. And that's all I can really say about that, Stephen, because we haven't been out on country for a long time with FMG. We went on a heritage survey only lately, once we started to sort of get our discussions back on the table last year. But like I said, since the book came out, that's kind of abruptly stopped all participation and engagement with FMG. But the thing that we don't know is what's been happening from 2011, since the division occurred in the Yindjibarndi community, and those things related to important and significant sites on our country. But what we do know is that over 5,000 sites have been destroyed.
And one thing I'd just add is that the federal government has a heritage protection law for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and Michael actually went to Canberra and appealed to the government to intervene. And that was a decade ago, and the environment was very different then. That was pre-Juukan Gorge, but I think there's potentially a lot more leverage you could get by going to the federal government and putting the pressure there.
We went back. Sorry, I'm glad you raised that as well. I mean, we went to the federal government back in 2012, I think it was, yeah. And it was under the process of a emergency application through the federal government to stop these unauthorised operations. When I say unauthorised by the Yindjibarndi people, and we're still waiting for an answer. So
We've got one more question.
Thank you. That was a beautiful presentation. My name is Megan Cracker. Work with the National Suicide Prevention and Trauma Recovery Project. Myself and Jerry Georgiadis, we've worked with about 20,000 people right across the country within the last 3 odd years. We've done a lot of work around the incarceration, suicide prevention, suicides right now for First Nations people. It was 1 in 23, but now 1 in 17. And in terms of incarceration, right now in Western Australia, 1 in 12 Aboriginal men are in prison today. The poverty narrative is really entrenched in our community right across the country. So, for example, right across the nation, us mob fall below the poverty line by 40%. But in Western Australia, it's 60%. So sometimes I do get disillusioned with government and the false promises and the false expectations and the hurt that they bring to our community. So I'm really pleased that you stood your ground, and just hearing some of the things that you spoke about, Michael, about lifting people out of poverty. But I think one of the things that is pertinent, that lives in all our hearts there, and we're all about love and that respect and that kindness, and it hurts when we see brothers and sisters being left behind, is how do we actually help lift and support our brothers and sisters out of poverty, where people right now, it's the cost of living that's hurting our people, and the suicides and the mental health and so forth. I guess it's not so much a question, it's basically commentary, having worked in this space for a very, very long period of time.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll get Michael and Paul to answer it.
Yeah, that'd be really appreciated.
Yeah, awesome.
I mean,
thanks heaps.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry.
give him one.
Go on. Just a quick one. Yep.
It's a good one because I know this bloke. Him and I used to muck around in that Victoria Club, Victoria Hotel. But I'm glad that you have I'm really glad that you fixed it all up, Michael, and your leadership back in the day when I was up there working with you. I could see you and Lorraine had the vision already then. My question is what's the next step for your youth? And I know after you and Lorraine are going to be working so hard, what's going to happen with the youth? And you mentioned this in the older Ned Sheedy said. But what's going to happen with the youth? Are you got a succession plan? Is the youth coming through, and are you doing anything structurally around that?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yep. That's it.
You can go for it, answer that one.
Yeah, and then think firstly the sisters thing as well. I mean, look, that's always going to be the problem, the challenge that we're going to try and fix up. So I think we need some good leadership. That's the question to that, right? People sing, Aboriginal leadership and Aboriginal people sing from the same songbook. And then being allowed to accept other assistance and help on the outside. So I think that's the step always taken. And we're slowly getting there as well with some of those challenges. But look, the concession plan is always have to be the next, have to be the answer to what we're starting. I mean, I'm not going to do this for the rest of my life. I want to at some stage, call it quit and go back to my grandfather's community out on country and live a sort of a happy, content life. You know what I mean? But my mission now for the next 10 years is to work really hard around those 3C areas that I talked about, and to bring the next generation on that journey as well. And to give them confidence as well that you don't have to be scared or frightened of taking up the leadership mantle. There's really no fear in that. I think everybody in this room is afraid of that particular role, right? So I've like I said, I've kind of experienced it firsthand that there's really nothing to be afraid of, and I want to teach that to my next generation, that you can stand up on any platform or any stage and give an honest opinion to what we believe, as long as it's respectful, as long as it's not derogatory to anyone, and as long as it has a vision that is inclusive of everyone that shares the same views. But there's one solution as well to fixing up all of our problems as well, right? Yeah. You know what that is? Elect me as your next Prime Minister.
Yeah, very good. Very good.
Sorry.
Well, thanks, Paul. Thanks, Michael. You can buy the book over at Boffin's, and you can vote for Michael next time round. Albo's got competition.
Yeah, exactly.
So I just want to say thanks, Paul, thanks, Michael, thanks all of you, and thank you, Buja.